Why are athletes afraid of making mistakes? And for yourself, why are you afraid of making mistakes? Well, in today's episode, we're going to dive into this idea of why athletes are afraid of making mistakes. And toward the end, I'm going to give you a simple tip that you can use if you are currently playing scared of making mistakes. Hey there, I'm Eli Straw, a mental performance coach who works with athletes from around the world within a structured 12-week mental performance coaching program. Most of the athletes I work with are afraid of making mistakes, and that's one of the main reasons why they are underperforming. But why are they afraid of making mistakes? Well, simply put, mistakes are not what we want to do as athletes. Mistakes signify that we didn't play well. But what I'm referring to here when I'm talking about the fear of making mistakes is not just saying, oh, I'd rather not make a mistake. It's not just understanding that mistakes lead to losing or to your team not doing quite as well. It's an actual fear. And so a fear of something means we don't just see this thing as something that, maybe we don't really want to have happen. We have fears because something is extremely negative. We think that we need to avoid it at all costs. So in other words, whatever we are afraid of, we perceive to be extremely negative. With mistakes, we perceive the mistake to be very negative. Now again, it's not just simply seeing a mistake as something that is bad within a game. It's seeing whatever's going to happen as a result of that mistake as something that is terrible and you need to avoid at all costs. So I always tell the athletes I work with that it's not just the mistake that we are afraid of. Because when we think about a lot of our fears just as human beings, we fear things that will either lead to pain, physical pain, or emotional pain. We fear things that will put us in danger. But striking out at the plate, the act of doing so is not really dangerous. The act of missing a basket or missing a shot in basketball, it's not something that we necessarily need to be afraid of in the sense that we are afraid of something physically harming us. It's more of the emotional pain that we see attached to mistakes that we fear. Now, another fear that develops in sports is the fear of contact or the fear of injury, and that is more physical. But the fear of mistakes is emotional. Now, why would I be emotionally afraid of making a mistake? This is where we start to see the perceived consequence of a mistake truly drive this fear. So, what I mean by this is if I make a mistake during a game, the mistake itself happens, but then there's something that results from that mistake that I'm truly afraid of. Maybe it's embarrassing myself. So I feel embarrassed if I make a mistake. Maybe I know that when I make mistakes, I have no control over my emotions and my confidence just completely plummets. And when my confidence plummets, my play follows. So now I'm afraid of my confidence dropping if I make a mistake. Or maybe I play on a team where my coach will pull me immediately if I make a mistake. And I'm afraid of being pulled from the game because that's embarrassing. And also because I really like playing. So I'm afraid of not getting to play out there. In each one of those scenarios, what we see is that there is an emotional feeling attached to some sort of consequence that will occur if we make the mistake. The reason I frame it like this is because when we are working to overcome fear of mistakes, because when we play with the fear of mistakes, we tend to play cautiously and hold ourselves back, we have to focus on this emotional attachment to the consequence because that's what we truly need to start overcoming in order to get ourselves to not be so afraid of making mistakes. So I want to give you a couple of examples of what I mean by this to really help illustrate this idea. The first example is a basketball player who gets pulled from the game if she makes a mistake. So as she goes into a game, she is worried constantly that she's going to make the wrong decision, whether it's the wrong pass, a turnover, taking the wrong shot, missing a shot. So she's experiencing a lot of stress during the game because she's thinking, if I mess up, coach will pull me. When she gets pulled from the game, she feels like she let herself down. She feels like she let her parents down. She feels like she let her team down. It's also very embarrassing for her to be pulled from the game. That's what she's trying to avoid. She's trying to avoid those negative feelings that she gets when she's pulled. Now, this is formed because it's happened in the past, and that's something that we'll see a lot when athletes are playing with the fear of making mistakes. They may have experienced something negative in the past that then makes them feel like, okay, I need to avoid that. I don't want to experience that again. So then they start becoming afraid of a situation where that would then occur once more. Another example is a baseball player who attaches so much identity to his batting average to where if he gets out and his batting average goes down, he feels not just like less of a person or less of a player, but less of a person. Now, that is a severe emotional attachment to his stats. Because of that, he fears striking out or getting out, so he fears having a bad at bat, not just because he'll simply get out, but because there is this emotional attachment to getting out that then takes a direct hit to his identity. Both of those scenarios show that these players are not just viewing mistakes as something that either does or doesn't happen during a game or something that is just part of the game. They're viewing mistakes as something more, something deeper, something personal, something that will lead to a negative emotional consequence. This is where we start to think, okay, how can we get the athlete? So, how can you get yourself to not feel so scared of that consequence occurring? Now, I'm going to be very transparent with you. This is incredibly difficult. And this is something that I spend weeks working with athletes to help them, change because I'm not meaning that you need to get to a point where you don't care about the result. I'm not saying that you want to get to a point where you don't care how you do or you don't care what people think. What I'm really referring to is we need to get to a point where we aren't so emotionally attached and scared of the consequence. And there are a couple different ways that you can do this. So, what I'm going to share with you right now are two different strategies that you can apply. And you probably need to apply both of them together to help you work through this fear of the consequence of a mistake. The first is getting to a point where you are a little bit more confident that you can handle the consequence. Now, the truth is probably that you've experienced something negative in the past within your sport. You've likely been benched, been yelled at, made a mistake in a big moment, but you're still where you are right now. You're still playing your sport. You're still working to improve. So, in other words, it was uncomfortable, but you handled it. So, then I want you to ask yourself a question. Is avoiding that negative thing again at all costs worth me never reaching my full potential as an athlete? Because the truth is, when we allow fears of consequences to control our play, so we just play to avoid those bad things at all costs, we are holding ourselves back and we are keeping ourselves from reaching our full potential because we're constantly playing cautiously. So when you start to think through the result of a mistake and you start to ask yourself, number one, can I actually handle that? And the truth is, you probably have handled it before. Now, that doesn't mean it's not uncomfortable, but it means you can handle it. And then you start to question it and ask yourself, is avoiding this worth me not allowing myself to play my best? And I would imagine the answer to that is, well, no, of course not. That's going to get you closer to letting go of this fear and being able to play more confidently and freely. The second strategy that you can take, or the second strategy you can apply, is working to reframe what your goals are during a game. When athletes play with the fear of making mistakes, so the fear of failure, and again, this fear is driven by the perceived consequence and that emotional connection or attachment we have to that. Avoiding mistakes becomes their main goal. But what we're trying to do is shift that. So you're not playing to avoid mistakes. You set yourself smaller targets, more controllable goals that you want to achieve. This could be something as simple as giving full effort and staying present throughout an entire game. That's what you want to begin focusing on instead of thinking so much about these consequences. And the reason I believe that identifying what is truly driving this fear of mistakes is helpful is because you can start thinking about, it's not just making a mistake. Making a mistake is going to happen. It's this consequence that we are afraid of. But the consequence that we are afraid of is likely something that we can manage, but also it's not worth keeping ourselves from playing aggressively, freely, confidently during games. So we need that goal going into games and focus on those smaller controllable goals instead of simply trying to avoid these mistakes at all costs. Now, again, those are just a couple simple strategies that you can apply based on this episode. However, if you are interested in a more personalized and in depth approach to helping you work through your fear of mistakes, I've put a link to my one on one mental performance coaching program below for you to learn more. In that coaching, we're going to work together one on one where I'm helping you personally work through this fear of mistakes, build confidence, and get you to a point where you can play freely. So, again, to learn more about that, click that link in the description below. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and please feel free to share it with any athlete who you know is struggling with the fear of mistakes. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I wish you the best of success in all that you do.